You have come here not merely to listen, but to remember the truth I speak today has always lived within you, perhaps buried beneath centuries of silence and inherited pain. The mother wound is not a concept of intellect, but a wound of the soul, an ancestral fissure in the psychic field that extends beyond the confines of one lifetime. It is the pain of separation from the archetypal source, the Great Mother, that vast field of being from which all life once knew unity, nourishment, and belonging. Yet, in the course of human development, consciousness required differentiation. It demanded that we step away from that infinite womb and into the cold light of awareness. It is in this movement that the wound was born. The empath, you see, is one who remembers too much of the original unity. Such a person is porous to the emotions of others, to the suffering that lingers unspoken in the air between words, to the invisible tides of ancestral memory that move through families and nations alike. The empath lives at the border between personal and collective consciousness. They are, in a sense, the priest or priestess of emotion, though rarely do they recognize this vocation consciously. More often, they are tormented by it, feeling themselves consumed by the energies they cannot name, drained by the unhealed pain of others that they mistake for their own. When we speak of healing the mother wound, we are not speaking merely of one's relationship with the biological mother. We speak of something far deeper, the transformation of the archetype of the mother within the psyche. Every human being carries within them an image ancient and primordial of the mother. She appears in dreams as the ocean, the earth, the cave, the serpent, the devouring goddess, or the radiant Madonna. When this archetype is distorted or wounded, the individual may oscillate between dependency and rebellion, between yearning for love and fearing engulfment. In the empath, this wound becomes magnified, for the empath's sensitivity acts as both curse and calling. They carry not only their own longing for the mother's embrace, but also that of generations. The mother wound manifests as the inability to stand fully within one's own psychic sovereignty. The child, unreceived in their true essence, learns to attune excessively to the moods and needs of the mother to survive. This adaptation becomes empathy, but an empathy born of trauma. The child learns to scan the emotional field, to become invisible when necessary, to regulate the mother's anxiety so that they may be permitted to exist. Yet in this process, they lose the spontaneous connection to their own instinct. They begin to confuse love with merging, compassion with self-abandonment. The empath becomes the caretaker of the collective shadow. To heal the mother wound is to reclaim the right to one's own inner life. It is to differentiate the self from the archetypal field of the wounded mother and to return her projection to its rightful source. In this work, one must descend into the unconscious, not as conqueror, but as humble initiate, for the mother wound guards the gates to the underworld, and only through the descent can the empath retrieve the lost fragments of soul that were surrendered in childhood. The empath's healing begins the moment they cease trying to save others. This is a paradox, for the empath's entire identity is often built upon the role of the savior. Yet as long as one seeks redemption through another's healing, one remains bound to the archetype of the sacrificial child, the one who must suffer to maintain harmony. The empath must turn inward and face the terrible loneliness of being separate from the mother. In this abyss, they encounter the devouring aspect of the archetype Kali, Lilith, the Black Madonna, the one who destroys illusion. It is she who consumes the false empathy that was rooted in fear, that fragile compassion that arose from the terror of abandonment, and in her fire, something new is born. True compassion, which arises not from merging, but from presence. Relationships transform instantly when the empath begins to differentiate. This does not mean that others change. Rather, the empath ceases to participate in the unconscious dance of projection. What once was entangled becomes clear. Where there was resentment, there is now understanding. Where there was exhaustion, there's now energy. The empath learns that love does not require suffering, that empathy without boundaries is not holiness but bondage. The transformation of relationship occurs because the psychic contract is rewritten. No longer does the empath carry what does not belong to them. This process, however, is not without suffering, for to withdraw projection from the mother is to face the inner emptiness that was once filled by her image. The empath must endure the alchemical nigredo, the dark night of the soul, where all that was familiar dissolves. This is a sacred dissolution, for it is only through the death of false identity that the self can emerge. In this darkness, the archetype of the mother transforms from the personal mother into the great mother, no longer the source of pain, but of mystery and wisdom. The empath, once a child lost in others' emotions, becomes the healer who stands at the threshold between worlds. When the empath heals, their presence itself becomes medicine, not because they seek to heal, but because they are whole. Others feel it, the integrity of someone who no longer plays the unconscious roles of rescuer or victim. It is an energetic truth. The psyche recognizes wholeness as safety. Relationships reorganize themselves around this new vibration. Those who thrived on the empath's unconscious caretaking may fall away. Others, ready to meet at the level of soul, are drawn near. This is not manipulation, it is resonance. The field of the healed empath is no longer porous, but luminous, a vessel through which the numinous flows. The mother wound, in its essence, is an initiation into the mystery of creation. Every creative act is born from the tension between separation and unity. The empath's task is not to dissolve that tension, but to hold it, to live in the paradox of being both connected and autonomous. This capacity, which Jung called individuation, is the hallmark of psychic maturity. Individuation is not isolation, It is the realization that the divine mother and the divine child coexist within the self. When the empath integrates this truth, they cease to seek externally what they already are internally. There is a dream I once encountered in my practice. A woman stands before a great ocean. She is weeping, for she has lost her mother. The waves rise and fall, and from the foam emerges a vast feminine figure, radiant and terrible. "Why do you seek me in form?" the ocean asks. "I was never gone. You are the daughter who must become the sea." This dream captures the essence of the empath's healing. The mother is not to be found outside, but within the depths of one's own unconscious. The empath who becomes the sea no longer fears drowning, for they have learned to breathe in the waters of their own psyche. We must remember that the archetype of the mother contains both light and shadow. She nurtures, but she also devours. To heal does not mean to banish the shadowy aspect, but to integrate it. The empath, who has long feared the devouring mother, must recognize that she also resides within. The tendency to absorb others' pain is the internalization of the devouring principle, an attempt to control suffering by consuming it. But when this energy is made conscious, it transforms into wisdom. The devouring mother becomes the guardian of boundaries. Her power to destroy becomes the power to protect. Many resist this transformation, for it demands the death of innocence. The empath must relinquish the identity of the good child, the one who saves the family through their sensitivity. Yet only through this symbolic death can the adult self be born. Jung wrote that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. To heal the mother wound is to return that burden to its origin. To say with love, "This is yours, not mine." Such words are an act of psychic liberation. They break the ancestral chain that binds the empath to generational pain. You see, when one individual heals the mother wound, the entire lineage feels it. The unconscious knows no boundaries of time. The empath becomes the vessel through which ancestors are released, for the psyche is holographic. The healing of one node resonates through the whole field. Thus, when relationships transform instantly, it is not magic, but psychology at the level of the soul. The empath's liberation rearranges the entire web of projections and attachments that had maintained the family's emotional equilibrium. The system must adjust, and it does so according to the law of psychic compensation. This is why the empath's healing often provokes resistance. Others may feel threatened, for they sense unconsciously that the old order is dissolving. Yet those who are ready will rise to meet the empath in this new field of authenticity. A relationship then becomes not an exchange of needs, but a dialogue between two souls aware of their own wholeness. It is in this meeting that love reveals its true nature, not dependency, not fusion, but participation in the mystery of being. And so, my friends, the healing of the mother wound is not a sentimental journey, but an initiation into the deepest mystery of the human condition. It is the descent into the realm of the Great Mother. the confrontation with the devouring darkness, and the emergence as the sovereign self, the empath's gift, once distorted by suffering, becomes the very light that illuminates the collective shadow. Through their healing, the archetype itself evolves, for humanity is the instrument through which the gods transform. When one stands before the mystery of the mother wound, one feels the tremor of something ancient stirring in the blood. It is not only a personal sorrow, it is the grief of the collective feminine, buried under centuries of silence, denied its sacred face. To touch this wound is to awaken the serpent that coils at the root of the psyche, the kundalini of remembrance that rises not to destroy, but to restore balance between spirit and matter. The empath, in their profound sensitivity, becomes the vessel for this resurrection, yet they must learn to differentiate between what is theirs and what belongs to the ages. Many times I have witnessed souls who mistake their compassion for virtue, when in truth it is bondage disguised as love. They carry the burdens of others as though these were their own karma, and they call it empathy. But empathy that denies discernment is not light, it is shadow in the garb of holiness. It is the ego's attempt to remain indispensable, to preserve the illusion of goodness. Healing begins when one recognizes that even compassion must submit to the laws of individuation. For true compassion arises only from the self, never from the ego that seeks to redeem the world in order to justify its pain. In the ancient myths, every hero must descend into the underworld to retrieve what was lost. Orpheus descend for Eurydice, Inanna for her sister, Christ for the souls imprisoned in Hades. So too must the empaths descend into their own unconscious, not to rescue another, but to retrieve the soul that was abandoned when they first assumed responsibility for their mother's pain. This descent is not metaphorical. It is a lived experience, marked by dreams, by sickness of the body, and disorientation of the mind. The soul resists awakening, for consciousness brings with it suffering, yet also freedom. When I speak of the empath's descent, I speak of the alchemical process by which projection is withdrawn and the opposites are reconciled. In alchemy, the first stage is nigredo, the blackening. It is the moment when all that once gave meaning is dissolved. The empath, once identified as healer, savior, or caretaker, finds that these roles no longer sustain them. They experience emptiness, despair, and confusion. Yet this darkness is the womb of rebirth. One must endure the chaos without seeking premature resolution. The ego's task is to suffer consciously, to remain present as the structures of illusion collapse. For in the psychic alchemy of transformation, suffering is not punishment, but purification. The mother wound, when illuminated, reveals its alchemical secret, that the empath's capacity to feel so deeply is the raw material for spiritual transmutation. The very sensitivity that once enslaved them becomes the organ of intuitive knowing the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. But first, it must be purified of sentimentality and projection. The empaths must allow their emotions to burn in the crucible of awareness until what remains is essence feeling without attachment, compassion without identification. There is a moment in this process that I have called enantiodromia, the turning of one thing into its opposite. The empath, who has lived by absorbing others' pain, suddenly begins to experience anger, resentment, even rage. This is the repressed vitality of the shadow emerging from exile. Many fear it, for they have been taught that to feel anger is to become like the devouring mother they once feared. Yet this anger is sacred. It is the fire that melts the chains of codependency. To feel one's rage without acting it out is to reclaim the instinctual energy that was once sacrificed to maintain peace. The empath, who learns to bear their fire without projecting it, becomes an alchemist of the soul. The alchemical symbol of the conjunctio, the sacred marriage, occurs when the opposites unite, light and dark, masculine and feminine, spirit and matter. In psychological terms, this is the integration of the anima and animus, the reconciliation of the inner mother and inner father. For the empath, this means no longer seeking externally the balance they have lost within. They cease looking for partners to complete them, cease projecting the maternal archetype onto lovers and friends. Relationships then shift from dependency to dialogue. The other becomes not savior or victim, but mirror, a living symbol through which the self perceives itself. I recall a patient, a woman of extraordinary sensitivity, who could feel the emotions of everyone around her. She was exhausted by her empathy, unable to distinguish where she ended, and others began in her dreams. She was forever carrying wounded animals, bleeding children, and dying mothers. One day, she dreamt of a lioness devouring her. Terrified, she came to me in tears. I told her, "This lioness is your strength. She devours the false self, so that the true one may emerge." Months later, she dreamt again. The lioness now lay beside her, purring. The energy that once consumed her had become her ally. So it is with all empaths who confront the devouring mother within. When they cease resisting her, she transforms from predator to protector. This is the essence of psychological alchemy, the transmutation of devouring into nourishing, of shadow into light. Yet one cannot perform this alchemy by will alone. It unfolds through a deep surrender to the unconscious, to dreams, to synchronicities, to symbols that arise spontaneously from the depths. The empath path is not linear. It moves in spirals through cycles of death and rebirth. Each descent reveals a deeper layer of the archetype. Each ascent brings greater consciousness. It is a rhythm akin to breathing the inhale of individuation, the exhale of connection. Many ask me, when the empath heals, why do relationships change so suddenly? The answer lies in the invisible field that binds human beings. We are not isolated entities. We exist within the collective psyche, woven together by unconscious patterns. When one individual withdraws their projection, the energy that sustained the old pattern dissolves. The entire relational field reorganizes itself according to the new level of consciousness. This is why it seems instantaneous, not because others have changed, but because the psychic architecture that maintained the illusion has collapsed. In the language of alchemy, this is the moment of illumination, the dawning of the inner sun. The empath, having endured the darkness, now radiates from the center of their being. They no longer absorb, they emanate. The light that once shone outward, seeking to heal others, now burns inward, illuminating the chambers of their own soul. This light is not egoic radiance, but the quiet presence of the self. It requires no validation, no recognition. It simply is. At this stage, love itself is transformed. The empath no longer loves to be loved, nor gives to be seen as good. They love because love is their nature. They see the divine spark even in those who wounded them, for they understand that all relationships are instruments of individuation. Every betrayal, every disappointment, every rejection was a mirror held up by the self, asking, "Do you see yet? Do you see who you are?" And when the empath finally answers yes, the cycle completes itself. They become free, not by escaping relationship, but by seeing it as the dance of the psyche, seeking wholeness. In mythic language, we might say the empath becomes the magician, the one who holds both the chalice of compassion and the sword of discernment. They can enter the emotional field of another without losing their own center. Their empathy becomes an act of creative participation rather than emotional contagion. They heal not through sacrifice, but through presence. Their relationships, once fraught with unconscious roles, become laboratories of transformation, living alchemical vessels in which both souls are refined. And yet, we must not imagine this transformation as a permanent state of bliss. The psyche moves in cycles. Integration is followed by new fragmentation, illumination by new shadow. The empath's task is not to reach perfection, but to remain in dialogue with the unconscious. To live symbolically is to accept that life itself is the unfolding of the self through opposites. Each relationship, each conflict, each moment of solitude is an opportunity for deeper union. The empath who understands this ceases to fear pain, for they know that within pain lies the seed of revelation. The collective implications of this healing are immense. We live in an age of emotional numbness and spiritual hunger. The world is filled with unhealed mother wounds nations, devouring their children. Humanity, estranged from nature, the feminine principle degraded and denied. When the empath heals, they restore balance not only within themselves but within the collective unconscious. They become carriers of the renewed feminine, the Sophia, who unites wisdom with compassion through them, the archetype of the mother is redeemed not as a sentimental figure, but as the cosmic principle of relatedness that holds creation together. Thus, my friends, healing the mother wound is not merely a personal act, it is a sacred service to the evolution of consciousness. Each empath who awakens reweaves a thread in the tapestry of the world's soul. The anima mundi, through their inner work, the collective psyche moves closer to wholeness. This is how relationships transform instantly, for in truth, there are no others. There is only one vast psyche dreaming itself through countless forms. To heal one's own relationship with the mother is to heal the relationship between humanity and the divine. The moment the empath emerges from the depths of the mother wound, a new dimension of consciousness unfolds. What was once experienced as personal suffering now reveals itself as participation in the eternal rhythm of the cosmos. The empath, reborn from the dark waters, becomes a bridge between the human and the divine. This is no metaphor, but a lived transformation of the psychic field itself. For in healing the mother, one reclaims the archetypal bond with life, and life responds. I have often said that the unconscious is not merely a repository of repressed memories, but a living reality, a vast ocean whose tides shape every shore of the conscious mind. When the empath learns to swim in these waters, they no longer drown in emotion. They move with the currents, guided by symbols that rise like constellations from the deep. Each dream becomes a message from the Great Mother herself, whispering, remember that you are both wave and sea. To live from this awareness is to live mythically, for one's personal story becomes inseparable from the eternal story of creation and return. The Great Mother, once feared as the devourer, now reveals her other face, the initiatrix. She calls the empath not merely to heal, but to embody the sacred wisdom that arises from integration. This is the stage the ancients called rubedo, the reddening, when the alchemical work is completed and the philosopher's stone emerges. The empath, once broken by love, now becomes love itself. They radiate an energy that awakens others not by word but by vibration. Yet this radiance must be lived humbly, for the ego is always tempted to appropriate the numinous, to claim the light as its own. True transformation is silent. It does not need to announce itself. It is at this point that many empaths feel a calling to teach, to heal, to guide, but the wise ones know that their work is not to save, but to awaken. Healing, in the Jungian sense, is never about fixing others, but about bringing unconscious material into consciousness. The empath, through their own descent, has learned the language of symbols. They recognize in another's suffering the echoes of the collective drama. They know that beneath every conflict lies a deeper archetypal pattern seeking integration. Thus, their presence becomes a mirror in which others glimpse their own soul. But let us be clear, the empath who has healed the mother wound does not escape suffering. On the contrary, they feel more deeply than ever but now they are not possessed by feeling. They allow sorrow to move through them, like wind through the reeds. They have discovered the paradox that one can suffer without being broken. This is the wisdom of the wounded healer, the archetype embodied by Chiron. The empath, like Chiron, learns that their wound is not a defect, but a portal. Through it, the divine enters the human realm. The healed empath carries within them the knowledge that to be whole is not to be unbroken, but to be conscious of one's fractures and to hold them in love. In the ancient mystery schools, initiates were taught that descent and ascent are one movement viewed from different sides. The empath's healing follows the same law: the descent into the mother wound, the confrontation with the shadow, and the death of the false self. All these are necessary preconditions for the ascent into wisdom. When the empath returns from the underworld, they carry the light of insight, just as Inanna emerged, crowned with the knowledge of both life and death. This return marks the birth of the inner alchemist who knows that every experience, no matter how painful, can be transmuted into gold if met with awareness. Relationships, after this transformation, take on a new character. The empath no longer seeks completion, but communion. They understand that each encounter is an opportunity for mutual revelation. They no longer fear intimacy, for they have made peace with the inner mother and thus no longer project her shadow onto others. The lover, the friend, the child, all are seen as expressions of the same archetypal dance of giving and receiving. The empath's boundaries become fluid, yet firm, like the shoreline that welcomes the tide, but does not dissolve in it. This balance between openness and containment is the hallmark of mature empathy. Consider how the collective mirrors the individual psyche. Humanity's estrangement from the natural world is the macrocosmic reflection of the mother wound. We have exploited the earth, consumed her resources, and denied her sacredness because we have not yet reconciled with the archetypal mother within. The empath, through personal healing, becomes an instrument of this collective reconciliation. They feel the pain of the planet not as abstract guilt, but as intimate kinship. Yet, unlike before, they do not collapse under the weight of it. They act from clarity, knowing that the true ecological healing begins in the soul's relationship with the Great Mother. To heal the psyche is to heal the world, for psyche and cosmos are one continuum. I remember a dream from my own depths many years ago that has never left me. I stood before a great tree, its roots descending into black water, its branches reaching into stars. A voice said, "This is the mother of all things. She feeds upon herself and gives birth from herself. You are her child, but also her witness." When I awoke, I understood that the tree was the symbol of individuation rooted in the unconscious, crowned in consciousness, nourished by the endless circulation between above and below. The empath's healing is precisely this: to become the living tree, to allow both shadow and light, to nourish the soul, to be simultaneously rooted in earth and open to heaven. The empath who reaches this stage perceives that all wounds are variations of one wound, the separation from the source, yet this separation is necessary, for consciousness can exist only where there is distance. The purpose of the wound, therefore, is not to be erased, but to be sanctified. When the empath accepts this paradox, suffering ceases to be meaningless. It becomes the very means by which the divine experiences itself through human form. This is why relationships transform instantly after healing. The empath no longer approaches others from lack, but from fullness. They no longer seek the lost mother in a partner's eyes. They see the mother everywhere, in the rain, in the silence between words, in the pulse of their own heart. Such awareness brings both ecstasy and solitude, for to see with the eyes of the self is to stand at the threshold of opposites, where joy and sorrow are woven together. The healed empath becomes a contemplative. Even in the midst of life, they find meaning not in external validation, but in the unfolding of symbols within the soul. Every event becomes a message. Every conflict, a dialogue between archetypes. They live in what I have called the symbolic life, where the outer world is recognized as a mirror of the inner. This is the true mysticism of the modern age, not escape from the world, but participation in its psychic depth. You may ask, how does one sustain this awareness in the turbulence of ordinary existence? The answer lies in ritual, not ritual in the primitive sense of superstition, but as conscious acts that anchor the psyche in meaning. The empath must create daily forms that remind them of their connection to the mother, perhaps through art, through nature, through silence. The unconscious speaks in images, not in concepts. To feed the soul, one must speak its language. The empath who neglects this becomes vulnerable once more to the collective shadow. For the unconscious, when ignored, returns as fate. Let us not forget that the world itself is undergoing a collective individuation. What we witness as chaos, the breakdown of systems, the polarization of values, the crisis of ecology and meaning are symptoms of a great psychic reorganization. The mother archetype, long suppressed, is rising from the depths, demanding recognition. Those who carry the empathic function are among her heralds. They feel the contractions of the world, soul as birth pangs. Their task is not to despair, but to hold consciousness amidst the storm. To remember that every apocalypse conceals an awakening. The word apocalypsis means revelation. The end of one order is the unveiling of another. Therefore, the empath healing is not a private luxury, but a preparation for service. To be healed is to become available to the divine work of integration that humanity must undertake. The empath becomes a psychopomp, a guide between worlds, helping others navigate the descent into their own unconscious. But unlike before, they no longer absorb, they illuminate. They do not lead through authority, but through authenticity. Their presence invites others to encounter their own depths. This is the quiet revolution of consciousness, the alchemy that begins within and radiates outward. And so I say to you, when the empath heals the mother wound, it is not only their relationships that transform. The entire fabric of reality shifts, for the psyche and the cosmos mirror one another. The empath becomes a microcosm of the great work, the eternal process by which the one becomes many and the many return to the one. Each act of awareness, each moment of compassion grounded in truth, contributes to this unfolding. The mother, once wounded, now sings through the healed heart of the empath, and her song is the music of renewal. There comes a time in every inner journey when the soul, having traversed the night of dissolution and the fire of purification, begins to perceive itself not as the seeker, but as that which was sought all along. The empath, who once moved through life as a mirror of others, discovers that they themselves are the source of the light reflected in those mirrors. The mother wound dissolves not because it is forgotten, but because it has been transfigured. What once was pain becomes the sacred scar, the mark of initiation. In this final phase of healing, the empath enters into union with the principle of creation itself, where love ceases to be an emotion and becomes a state of consciousness. This is the mystery of the sacred marriage, the hieros gamos, the union of the divine feminine and masculine within the soul. The empath, long identified with the receptive lunar principle, the one who feels, absorbs, receives, must now awaken the solar current of consciousness, the capacity to illuminate, to act, to create. Only when these two currents are reconciled does the psyche become whole. The lunar compassion of the mother and the solar clarity of the father intertwine, and from their union the true self is born, the Christ child, the philosopher's stone, the symbol of wholeness that alchemists sought in their crucibles of fire and dream. I must emphasize that this inner union is not an abstraction. It manifests in every aspect of life, in how one loves, works, speaks, and dreams. When the empath integrates their inner masculine, they no longer drift in the currents of others' emotions. They learn to steer the vessel of the soul with purpose. Action arises not from compulsion, but from alignment. Words are no longer spoken to please or heal, but to reveal truth. Creativity flows not as escape, but as participation in the ongoing act of cosmic becoming. The empath ceases to be merely a conduit for others' pain and becomes a co-creator of meaning. At this stage, many experience a profound stillness. It is as if the inner storm that once raged incessantly has given way to a quiet ocean. Yet beneath this calm, there is an immense vitality, the energy of the self flowing freely through the psyche. The empath, once burdened by empathy, now radiates equanimity. They do not need to protect their energy, for their energy has become transparent. Nothing clings to them, for there is no longer a self to be defended. This is not indifference, but transcendence of identification, to feel deeply without being possessed by feeling that is mastery of the heart. In this condition of wholeness, relationships no longer serve to complete, but to celebrate. The empath meets others as equals in the mystery of existence. There is no hierarchy, no dependence, no unconscious contract of suffering. The dance of projection has ended, and in its place arises the pure communion of souls aware of their own divinity. Love, freed from its archetypal distortions, becomes the radiance of being itself, an energy that blesses all it touches, requiring nothing in return. This is why relationships transform instantly when the mother wound is healed, because love, once bound by fear, has become consciousness. Let us contemplate the symbolism of the heart. In the ancient traditions, the heart was not merely an organ of emotion, but the seat of the divine spark. It was said that the gods placed in the human heart a fragment of their own essence, so that even in forgetfulness, we would always yearn to return to them. The empath's journey is, in truth, the awakening of that spark. Their suffering has been the fire that purified the heart, their compassion, the water that cooled it. Now, the heart becomes the philosopher's furnace, where spirit and matter, masculine and feminine, heaven and earth, unite in the eternal act of love. The healed empath perceives that all relationships are ultimately reflections of the soul's relationship with the divine. Every person they have ever loved or lost, every betrayal and reconciliation, every longing and fulfillment, all were chapters in the dialogue between the human and the eternal. Once this is seen, forgiveness arises effortlessly. For what is there to forgive when every wound was an initiation, every loss a passage toward remembrance? The mother who wounded was herself wounded. The father who abandoned was himself lost. In this awareness, compassion ceases to be pity and becomes comprehension. The empath sees through the illusion of separateness and beholds the great web of interbeing, woven from the threads of joy and sorrow alike. Yet this realization does not lead to withdrawal from the world. On the contrary, it deepens one's participation in it. The empath, now fully individuated, understands that the world itself is the body of the divine, that every act of kindness, every creative impulse, every moment of presence contributes to the evolution of consciousness. To live authentically is to serve the great work, not through grand gestures, but through the quiet alignment of daily being. The healed empath becomes a vessel of eros, not the romantic passion of the ego, but the universal principle of connection that binds all things through them. The world remembers its own unity. You may notice that such individuals possess a peculiar radiance. They move through life with a gentleness that does not weaken and a strength that does not dominate. They can look into another's eyes and see not the persona, not the wound, but the soul longing for itself. Their very presence dissolves pretense, for authenticity is contagious. This is the living embodiment of what I once called the self, the totality that embraces both conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, human and divine. The empath, once fragmented by identification with suffering, now becomes an instrument of integration. They no longer interpret life through the lens of trauma, but through the rhythm of meaning. To such a soul, even solitude becomes a sacrament. They understand that being alone is not the absence of love, but its deepest form, the communion with the self. From this solitude, they engage the world not from need, but from overflow. Their creativity becomes prayer, their relationships, temples of transformation. They no longer ask life, what can I get? But what can I express of the divine through this moment? In this shift, the empath fulfills their true purpose, to be a living channel of consciousness, to bridge heaven and earth through the alchemy of feeling and awareness. I have often said that the task of the modern human being is to rediscover the sacred within the ordinary. The empath, having traversed the labyrinth of the mother wound, becomes the guardian of this rediscovery. They sense the sacred pulse in every gesture, the breath of the eternal in every encounter. They know that the divine does not dwell only in temples or scriptures, but in laughter, in sorrow, in the silence that follows both. The mother they once sought is now present in the fabric of reality, not as a figure, but as the ever-living field of relatedness that sustains existence. The world itself has become her body, and through their awareness, she is made conscious of herself. Now, you may ask, what then is the purpose of empathy once it is healed? It becomes not reaction, but revelation. True empathy is a perception of unity behind diversity. It is the intuitive recognition that what suffers in another is the same essence that awakens in oneself. The healed empath does not rescue. They witness. They do not absorb pain. They illuminate it. In their presence, others remember who they are, because the empath embodies remembrance. This is how transformation ripples outward, not by effort, but by resonance. The healed heart becomes a tuning fork for consciousness, attuning the world to its forgotten harmony. And yet, even in this state, humility must prevail, for as long as one lives, the work of integration continues. The unconscious is infinite. The self is ever unfolding. The empath must remain a student of the soul, aware that enlightenment is not a destination, but a rhythm, a continual dance between forgetting and remembering. The healed one walks with reverence, knowing that every person they meet may be another face of the divine, another messenger of the Great Mother in disguise. This attitude of sacred curiosity keeps the soul supple, the heart open. When the empath reaches this point, they become, in the truest sense, creators of reality, not through willful manifestation, but through alignment with the archetypal flow of life. Their thoughts, feelings, And actions are no longer fragments, but expressions of the same field of consciousness. They participate consciously in what the ancients called theopeusis, the process of becoming divine through awareness. Each act of kindness, each moment of insight, each surrender to truth adds light to the collective psyche. The world responds to them differently because they have ceased to oppose it. They have become one with its unfolding. And so, my friends, when I say that relationships transform instantly as the empath heals the mother wound, I speak not of magic, but of natural law. The psyche, once fractured, reorganizes itself according to harmony. What was once chaos becomes cosmos. The inner marriage of feminine and masculine radiates outward as harmony in human connection. The empath no longer meets the world as orphan, but as creator. The mother, once wounded, now lives within them as wisdom, as power, as love that embraces both life and death. The circle has closed, and in its center stands the self, radiant, silent, whole. This is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new one, the journey of conscious participation in the evolution of the world soul. The empath, reborn through pain into presence, becomes a midwife of the new consciousness emerging in our time. Each healed heart adds to the resonance of awakening. Each act of awareness nourishes the Great Mother as she dreams a new world into being through us. And so, if you feel a stirring in your depths, that ancient pulse of love and sorrow entwined, do not turn away. Enter it. Descend as the empath must descend. For within that wound lies the secret of creation. And within that secret, the remembrance of who you have always been. When you emerge, you will find that nothing outside you has changed. And yet everything is different. For you will see with the eyes of the mother eyes that love without fear, that see without judgment, that create without end. And that, my friends, is how the empath in healing the mother wound becomes not merely whole but divine.